folks. Got the agenda pulled up for today for our CA baseline governance call. We had some pretty good conversations over the last governance and profiling streams that I just want to remind folks they're available on our YouTube playlist. And we recently switched over to a new location for our materials from our meetings. And normally on an average day, I don't put all of these kind of framing slides in that space because those recordings are available. But I know there was some discussions around kind of terminology last week, particularly that might influence some of our conversations today. So I loaded the deck from last week there as well, if anyone's interested in it, but I have the recap where it's possible kind of referenced in some of today's slides. The only other housekeeping piece I'll just make note of is that I think we announced it last week, but this is maybe the first official call of governance since we made the update. So we've moved over to the new project URL in Simplifier. So same great project, same history of materials, but it's just a shortened URL now to kind of be more in alignment with obviously our kind of packaging and easier for folks to actually find and use. So I think that's it on the housekeeping pieces.
Okay. Hi guys.
Sorry, Warren, what was that?
Oh no, I just came in. I thought I was on the wrong account, but
No,
never mind.
you're good.
Okay, carry on.
So I've got 3 topics for today. Mike was amazing and he took a bunch of notes from the call on the 26th and he shared those with me. I tried where possible to kind of incorporate them in and to pull out some of the topics that had started to have some discussions. But actually there's probably one other thing in looking at Mike's notes that we might just want to cover in terms of a housekeeping item, and that's, I think it's the next May 24th call. And that would be whether or not we want to cancel it. But I took the items from Mike's notes from the 26th and some of the carryover discussion from last week. And here's what I'm looking at for kind of potential agenda topics. Let me know what you're thinking, if there's things that we should add to this, if we should reprioritize kind of ordering. The first one is, do we keep the May 24th call? I think there was a question at the last governance call about whether or not it made sense, given it's at the tail end of the working group meeting. So we'll see what how folks are feeling about keeping that one on the books. The other conversation topics I think that we've got in place, we want to make sure we, in the context of kind of what we heard last week, come back to the discussion that was started around sub-value sets on the 26th. So discussing near term versus long term, now that we have a little bit more information about what might be available to us in the future. There were some points around the CA core review on that 26th call, so I just kind of pulled out a few of them if folks want to continue talking through them. I know one of the items was do we continue to review content as a community, and how frequently, and when do we do that? So given that there's a release of the core out with the kind of next round of subset of profiles, I think it just merits at least saying will we, won't we, and what will that look like? And then I've got another topic, which is just kind of taking what we heard last week and starting to discuss kind of what our kind of approach and plan might be for accommodating changes to what our terminology might look like, and how we reference pointers and include them in our profiles in the next 3 to 4 to 5 months. What other topics am I missing that folks want to make sure we touch on today?
Seems a pretty substantial set to begin with. So.
All right. Then the first one I think should be pretty easy. May 24th, Mike's note said some folks had indicated they may not be available. That would be our next governance call. Is it one that we want to keep on the books same time? Do we want to have a bye week and just do 2 profilings back to back on the 17th and I think it's the 31st?
I mean, not that I'm a determining factor in any way, but I will be in transit on the 24th.
Yeah, I'll definitely still be in meetings at the working group meeting on the
Yes,
24th.
some other people will as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
suspect possibly Elliot too, but that doesn't mean that there's not enough people to run a call.
Yeah, I was about to say exactly that.
Is anyone super keen? Because I know, I think we had a call that was kind of over a long potential holiday a while back, and we said, okay, we'll keep the call open, we'll join if folks do join, and we didn't really have any joiners. Is there anyone really keen to have the call? And keep it on the 24th?
That was Good Friday, so it's maybe not quite comparable, but
I want to make a inappropriate standards joke about holidays in the standards world, but
yeah.
I'll leave that one there. So I'll make the call out again. If we hosted, so we'll have a call next week on profiling, and go through kind of our traditional kind of community issue log topics. The following week, would be governance. Like, one, do folks want to continue on to have the governance call, or do we want to maybe retrofit it and have a profiling community issue review at that time? Like, is anyone super gung ho about not canceling on the 24th? If not, then I think we'll probably end up just canceling it and putting out the announcement on the forum so folks know. All right, going.
Sounds like
All right.
like that's the plan.
I think you guys get the announcements when we cancel via Zoom as well, right? Like, I think if you've registered for a specific session.
Probably, but I rarely register until 5 minutes before the meeting.
All right, so first topic done. We will cancel the 24th call. The next topic that we've got on the agenda is sub value sets, and in the context of kind of near term and kind of long term. Rita, I saw you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I arrived a little bit late, but May 24th, are you canceling that because of the
Yes.
long weekend?
No, we had a number of folks on the 26th and today just mentioned that they won't be available. So
Oh, okay.
if you do
because
want to join, we don't necessarily have to cancel it, but we were just asking if anybody wanted to
Okay.
and planned on joining.
Because
In
the long
Ontario,
weekend is
at least.
actually the weekend before that. It's the May
Yeah,
20th.
that's what I was just about to say.
Yeah. So May 20th is a long weekend, so a lot of people might be taking that Friday off before that.
So that would be the next profiling call, the 17th,
The
right?
17th. Yeah, might be a low attendance day.
All right, let's see.
It might be, I will be traveling to the HLSF working group meeting next Friday. But
So on that front, I'm always happy to get on a call whenever, but is there anyone that's super keen to get on the 17th for profiling? No one's super keen to go through community issue log items? Although I will say, Piers, I think I saw him join earlier. Thank you for putting some of those through that we discussed on last week's call. So every little bit helps.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do more, and I can join on the 17th or not. I usually just join, and then if the call isn't happening, then I figure it's been canceled.
Yeah. And like, I'm happy, they tend to not to be, we can make it so maybe it's more like action oriented. So it's not going to be heavily decision making around the profiles if that's what folks are more comfortable with. I know we've done a mixture of both. Sometimes in the profiling calls, it'll be like a split of these are decisions that we have to make and vote on that would result in changes. And sometimes this is the application of changes in the troubleshooting. And I think we were looking at QAing some of the invariants, so that may not require like quorum or decision making if folks are just kind of interested in getting on and putting our brains together on that stuff. So I'll keep it. If anyone wants to join, they can join. We'll just kind of keep it away from like new profiling decisions that would otherwise require votes. that sound fair or unfair to anyone?
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. So, anything else before we jump into this kind of first piece around stub value sets, given some of the conversations we had last week around the terminology server? All right. So I just put in some context and some of the discussions from the 20 call on the 26th from our last governance call. So kind of put it forward to say, we've gotten a request and we've implemented them in the past, a structure called sub value sets, which is basically just, it is the name of the value set that we're intending to point to in Terminology Gateway, usually with some type of human pointer to the URL of, you know, how do you actually find that value set that prompts the login? Because in the way it's set up in some elements in the baseline today and that it's been set up in the past is if you're not logged in and you try to click on the value set URL that we have currently attached in some of the practitioner role elements, if you're not logged into the Terminology Gateway, you'll just kind of get this, it's like a 404 error or 403 error. And so a lot of times folks would get kind of hung up on that, you know, not sure if it meant, oh, that no longer resolves or something's changed, but in reality, like we just needed a structure to kind of say, okay, if you want to know what belongs here, go to this link on the Terminology Gateway and you can review the content that way. And so we've done it in a few places, not just other profiles, but I think we actually have it in a few places in the practitioner role and practitioner space. But there are a few places that don't have sub value sets made for them right now. So Alberta had raised wanting to see a little bit more harmonization and like consistency, particularly in trying to leverage what's in practitioner and practitioner role. And some of them obviously still don't have those stub value sets. Important to note, like it doesn't necessarily, like it doesn't give you like a conformance thing that will like call the value set and give it back to you, but it does help with that like first half of like, if you're a human that's reviewing it and you want a structure that is going to provide you with here is the expected value set URL and here's the URL for how to interact with the contents on a web page. It's a nice thing to have. So we heard last week, we got an update kind of on the kind of plan and approach around a terminology server, particularly around like some of the content that we have in the baseline that is currently hosted on Terminology Gateway today. I would anticipate, because I think subsets were one of the things that was discussed, that a good deal of the practitioner and practitioner role value sets that we point to today in Terminology Gateway will be part of that. But the timing, I think, when we heard the update last week was going to be more like June was a focus on kind of internal reviews and discussions, but the content may not be like available quite yet. So knowing that some of the information may not be accessible until, you know, quite a bit later in the summer, I wanted to bring this question back, which is to say that like, is there any concerns that we would have in deploying a short-term interim solution to help one of our end users while we wait for kind of the long-term approach and the long-term mechanics to be available to us for pointing to our value sets when we have a terminology server that's deployed and we have those pointers in play. I don't know if you guys talked about like cons, if there was like anything that was keeping folks from saying, yes, that makes sense. But I did see in Mike's notes that the folks wanted to kind of explore what the future might look like before making a decision.
Well,
Yeah,
the
I
other
mean-
thing was that some of us, including me, didn't know actually what we were getting back from the stub value sets. And we couldn't answer that question on the call. Like we didn't know if we were getting content or if it was empty or what would excuse me. Oh, sorry. Or what was happening. So that was part of the question.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And so it is like a fully empty structure. Let me see if I can pull up an example. I'm just pulling it up on my other screen. of one that we use in a different profile. Let me see.
I also heard somebody else trying to talk when I was starting too, so.
Yeah, that was me and Lorraine, but I'll just wait for, I want Sharon to go through this.
Let me see. I'm just going to go to our baseline page and I'll pull it up on. One second. I should have had this pulled up already, but. All right. So here is just our baseline simplifier page. And so I was just going to look at the value sets of the stubs that we've already created. So we've created a stub value set. Let's take a look at the one for like prescription medicinal product. So within this, this is an example one where we basically said, so this one isn't totally empty because we have like an import claim, but it's posted at the baseline URL. And this is one we've done in the past. We don't necessarily have to do that this time around if we want the value set to actually be reflective of the URL we would anticipate this content would live. And then we put usually you can access this information here, and that's usually a link to the actual page in Terminology Gateway for interacting with that content. So let me just. So this is like the web page for prescription medicinal product. We previously would just point to this in our profiles before and not create this kind of intermediary human structure. But that was what was creating confusion in a lot of folks. So more conventionally, there isn't like an importation claim. And so for the ones in practitioner specialty, we probably wouldn't want to do the exact same thing. Of having like import everything from this, but it's not something that actually provides like an API call that would like gather this content. It's just a navigational structure.
So the point I was going to make, Sheridan, is that in the medium to long term, assuming that there will be ongoing development for various reasons, in my past, different kind of past, mind you, but in my past, this idea of stubbing was always necessary, right? Like, you had to allow certain processes to get to a certain point. There may be SDO stuff going on in the background where you don't quite have that set firmed up yet. But the main thing that you need when you do this is back to your idea about the mechanics and the rules associated with the mechanics. In other words, how do you test when, or how do you evaluate when a stub is appropriate? So that sort of would have to be established. And then what are the mechanics for actually transitioning from stub to the proper interface? Because, especially if you're providing this as a terminology service, you don't know how many people are hung out there necessarily, or maybe we do, but when you do make that transition, there's some things you need to assess in terms of who will be impacted, how are they aware? Does this affect the timing of what you do, et cetera? So there's a bunch of governance processes that a set of rules or criteria. Criteria is good, better than rules. And then the mechanics for actually actioning it. So this is when we stub is good. Okay. This is when it's now going to become real. Okay. Easy. How do we roll that out?
Yeah.
Because
So
not everyone's going to be at the same point.
Yeah, there's benefit to having the something come up for the human reader if you say clicked on a link in an implementation guide, because like Alberta, BC references the Terminology Gateway value sets for things like practitioner specialty, practitioner role, etc. Of course, the downside is it still hasn't solved the problem of not being able to resolve when we try to validate our implementation guides. And so it throws all sorts of warnings and errors in our implementation guides. But I think having something is better than getting nothing.
And I think in a lot of places where, like, if we're pointing to like an HL7 or commonly an HL7 value set that's hosted on tx.fire.org, and we don't have to worry about like having to create a stub for that. I think like that's the type of thing that I'm less concerned about. Like if there's another way of getting at that information, but I think that we've had a number of things now that fall into that area where it's like it's actively being used. The fact that like there isn't anything that in the package that a validator knows to kind of search against, and that human viewers are getting confused when they interact with the profiles and don't know what to do next.
Well, like,
Seem like good
something that's in THO, we should just be able to bind to the THO publication of the value set, so that shouldn't be a problem. Right,
Yeah.
I don't see needing a stub there, we've got the real connection. It's places like stuff that's in the terminology gateway where it doesn't resolve because it's behind a password wall.
And the way we've set these up, once I'm just looking at the prescription drug form one right now, which is a value set that says include all of the InfoWay value set. As soon as we can resolve the InfoWay value set, because they've now stood up a terminology server, this should work perfectly.
And so the way that we have it, so your statement is around actually like keeping the like importation claims because it helps with the transition.
Well, it helps until we do have one. And after we have one, it's not going to hurt anything. It's sort of an extra hop, but it also gives us a little bit more ability to control the content. We may say that the value set that we actually want to use is not just the InfoWay one, but it's something else. And so we can redefine it within CA baseline without having to worry about what InfoWay does, whether they change the definition of the value set or not.
That we pointed to in our kind of import claim. Just reading this back. So it gives us more control and gives us an approach that actually allows for something to meaningfully work within the tooling after the value sets have been, if those value sets are hosted with the same value set URL.
Yeah.
So I think that's like maybe not around necessarily the governance, but probably the mechanics. So I've kind of organized it there. So
Yeah, that's good.
if that answers like the two biggest cuts that we have, which is anything that currently is behind a password wall, terminology gateway is a good example, but I know like US Core often had this problem, or when it started to utilize content from like, I think it was like National Library of Medicine, that kind of thing. So like it scales beyond just terminology gateway potentially as a criteria. If we look at then practitioner and practitioner role real quick.
I hope we're not using BSAC anywhere, but
We shouldn't be, no.
Sorry?
I said I hope we're not using BSAC anywhere because it's very US centric.
I don't anticipate, but let's take a look. So
No, I don't think we are, but it's one that's given me no end of headaches.
Yes.
Trying to look at content.
I'm sure. Yeah, I think the only thing where that came up was one of the things in the CAFEX review. We were basing our profile on a US Core profile. And I sort of questioned that approach, but that was sort of, we set that aside for a later discussion. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so I think it's probably actually not going to show up here. I think it's going to be here and here. Okay. Let me just, before I close out any of these, I want to make sure any of the potential bindings that we're talking about are known here. Okay, so it's not showing up here. Okay, so in the practitioner and the practitioner role space, what we're looking at right now is we've got these bindings to healthcare provider role type, health, and then practitioner specialty. And so these ones I think are both not set up to have stubs. So that download was what happens when you hit it and you are downloading, or when you are logged into the terminology gateway. The other place, I'm just going to check. I think that might be the only two places, because I think we might host these in the baseline. Would be potentially showing up here. So we've got SCP qual and SCP type would be the other things. They're not necessarily bindings. These are like fixed patterns. But it would be the other place that we might just want to have that conversation. So when thinking about the criteria, do we feel good about like an interim approach that we could make stubs for healthcare provider role type? And if we feel like it meets the criteria, how might we want to construct that? So I don't think it's in txfire.org. I'm pretty sure. Let me just go to Terminology Gateway. And while I'm pulling this up, I think we might have a few folks from Alberta on the call. Like, do you want to give us just a little bit of insight into kind of when you're hoping to see the stub value sets be in a place where you could reference them, just so that it helps provide some context to folks around when we might want to make the change formally and package it up? Maybe did I not see someone? I see
saw Randy.
Randy's on, Sandra, Thomas. Like, I know like you guys spoke to needing these on the 26th, but like when we're thinking about making the stub and making it accessible, like are we targeting like a month?
Sorry, I heard part of the question.
Oh, so in evaluating the request for the stub value sets for practitioner and practitioner role, is this like, if we feel like makes sense, we want to make the stubs, let's package up the baseline. Is there any context that you can share about like if it wasn't done in the next month, it's a problem, you know, if it's not done in the next 2 weeks, it's a problem, just to help orient how quickly we have to actually make the sub value sets themselves?
We don't necessarily have a hard timeline here. Other than I think we were aiming for July, so
it being one of probably the next things that we make sure that is included within the package. Okay.
Yeah, from BC's point of view, because we do reference these in our guide as well. We're planning to push our guide itself into production in the next several weeks, sometimes this month. But I mean, it will still stay breaking until we do this. And then eventually when it's fixed, it will automatically be fixed. So it's something that we'd like to see soon, but we don't have to jump up and down and do it next week.
The lift is, I mean, once we say we're going to do this, and we know whether or not we want to put the import claim in, the lift is light. It's just around determining like do we want to put it out as like a 118, or do we put it out as a 1-2, that type of decision. But I think one foot in front of the other. In the meantime, I was able to pull up the one that we're looking at. So this one is looks like its own code system. So I don't anticipate this one was going to be in tx.fire.org, but
I doubt it.
It's not.
Yeah, that code system dates back to the terminology worksheet.
okay. Oops, hold on. See, there's a faster way of actually doing this. Is there a faster way to navigate to, what is it? The actual server home. Do you know when you can like search the code systems? Maybe it's the registry. Hold on. Oh, it's terminology.hl7.org. Okay, this is what I'm thinking. Okay, that has the. Okay. So, not hosted is going to be something that right now is being hosted at Terminology Gateway, so it has a password. And then the other one is, so this one is the role. The other one I think was specialty, which I'm going to guess is going to be the exact same. It's like a V3 code system, right?
Well, it's a code system that was used in V3, whether it's strictly a V3 code system is another matter. We do have a bunch of those, like particularly in the provider registry stuff in BC. We point to a bunch of stuff that was those historical code sets, and sometimes we have local versions that include the what was in Terminology Gateway plus specific BC codes. In addition, because there wasn't those things needed that weren't in that original.
So Anil had put something in the chat actually that I think is a really important point, which is, so this is the SCP type code system in the terminology server, but so it doesn't actually have the representation of that content here. So a lot of times like this will get loaded with, these are known code systems, almost kind of like acting like naming systems without hosting the content itself in the same way that we see like this International SNOMED edition accessible here. Do we just need to just clarify then if it's like as a hosted?
Well, there's hosting. So SNOMED, of course, we're not hosting, but we do host value sets that are written against SNOMED. And we want to be able to expand those. I think, but that's, I think, getting beyond the stub value set question.
Yeah. But at least to say that like the reason that we're doing it is because you don't have another way of getting at it right now in the interim. Okay. All right.
Well,
So-
but getting at it for what purpose?
Yes. So, and I think to expand on what Elliot's saying, like the stub value sets basically give us something that resolves if a human's clicking on the link in the guide and looking at something. And that's actually a valid purpose, so that the links that aren't broken. Being able to have a validator reach out and actually validate against the concepts that are in those value sets. That's a different question, which is also still desirable, but the stub value sets don't get us that. Hopefully the terminology server will. Is that what you're getting at, Elliot?
Well, I mean, if you use these profiles in your system and you have our value sets, the stub ones, which say go and include this other one, and you've gone and loaded into your local terminology that other value set, you'll be able to validate. The thing is, we just can't load in content from Terminology Gateway automatically.
Correct. And I think in the long term, that's desirable, whether it lives in Terminology Gateway or eventually lives somewhere else. But
So can I'm gonna ask like an immediate term question, and then there's an area I'd like us to explore for like the more long-term approach to stub value sets. So the immediate term question is, if these the ones that are put forward for practitioner role meet the criteria, how, like, one, are we okay discussing and even potentially like taking a vote on moving forward with at least these two that are requested? And then we can talk about other places that we would look and apply this criteria. And two, talking about whether or not we want to use the same structure, like the importation claim structure. Is anyone not comfortable with just tackling that piece first and then talking a little bit about maybe some more of the long-term pieces? So with the two that have been requested, do we want to take a vote on, yep, sounds good, meets the criteria? Or are we comfortable basically saying, like, if something falls in this criteria, this is what we're going to use moving forward? I'll take the simpler of the two options, because I just need to know whether or not this is something that maybe we'll like put into like the profiling stream in the coming week or two. So does anyone feel like we would need more discussion to at least say whether or not we want to have a stub value set created for healthcare provider role type, practitioner specialty, and then I think there's like an SCP type as well that's being noted here that isn't already falling to this space.
so just to clarify, that means if we point at the stub value set in the
Yep.
interim, when there's something that's real and resolvable, will we have to change our bindings, or will the stub value set forward to the real thing once it's available?
If we do this right, and what we've put into the claim is what it's hosted against in a new terminology server, then I believe that's true.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good with this. I was trying to be quiet in case Alberta wanted to weigh in.
And the other thing I was going to mention is if it does change, like our stub value set, the binding for our profile wouldn't change, but we could change like what goes in it. So we could say, oh, and this value set is now hosted at this URL. I think that's the flexibility that Elliot was talking about. In addition to it being like compiling multiple things together, it also gives us that level of control if like there's a new URL that we want to point to.
I'll be really upset if Infoway changes their canonical URLs, but that's beside the point.
Well, you mean once we get the canonical URL sorted out, because that's still under discussion.
Well, that's for the HL7 Canada canonical URLs, but I wouldn't expect Infoway to be changing the Infoway canonical URLs for their value sets.
Agreed.
We would
I
hope
mean-
those would be stable, yeah.
Yeah, this stuff needs to get stable.
I mean, sometimes we think a thing is stable and it takes us a while to understand why it isn't. Because we just haven't imagined all the use cases, but you can do the way.
But yeah, but Elliot's anticipating, and as I would be too, that downstream effect of changing all that stuff once, now
Oh,
that we've
yeah,
got a
big-
whole bunch of things
Be
dependent on
huge.
it.
Yeah, it's a big impact, big scope
Yeah.
impact, which comes to the governance question. Right? Like,
Hmm.
if you
But it's an
find,
Infoway governance question.
well, I don't
Yeah,
think it is if
it's-
it affects,
It's
If it
it's
affects-
not baseline governance. It's Infoway
Yeah.
governance. Elliot's right.
There's an impact nationally.
Yeah.
no, that's my comment, that's my comment. So while it is a choice that, Infoway is doing in terms of as a, possessing the space within which the problem is being solved, at the same time, if anyone else externally is using those assets, they are impacted. So
Yeah.
so it isn't just Infoway governance. Infoway could make a decision, but, and I can't stress this enough, in my mind, the one overwhelming value proposition of governance is so that people can be confident that when they invest time and energy in doing a thing, they're not going to get the rug pulled out under their feet.
Yes.
Right.
But to Elliot's point, that's a governance question that's bigger than the scope of the baseline.
Oh, yeah,
governance.
yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, and the other comment I'm making is that, I know we've talked about this before, which is we're very rapidly approaching shared in a place where the absence of governance at a more meta level is going to become problematic. And we need to start raising that, I think. We need to get that moving.
It's already problematic.
It's already problematic.
And that's one of the reasons why one of our future topics in our list, when we talked about topics, was coming back and rediscussing the relationship between baseline governance and the other governance that exists around us, and getting updated on that. That's not quite the same thing as what you're talking about, but that's what we have in our control in terms of scope and understanding, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I've made it clear, like I'm comfortable. So I'm speaking with my HL7 Canada hat on. I'm comfortable with governing HL7's behavior, HL7 Canada's behavior within the context of the decisions that we can make, where we can assess the scope effect and we have some of the capacity to address that, right? It's when it goes beyond that it becomes a challenge. So, in the meantime, we're making the decisions that we can as we can, and we're talking about things we need to, but there is a point where really that's got to roll uphill somewhere, and in order for us to be confident. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. First step.
Is there anything that we can do in how we host the stub value set that gives us any insulation there? Like I'm just thinking about the question around, so I started to type out the example, and the question around, like, what is the actual URL that we point to? And here what we did was we had it as a baseline value set URL, so that we were like, that way, no matter if something does change here, that like this is a semi-stable thing. Like, does that help us? Does that hurt the issue? Like, if in my example, I'm looking at this. Does that help, like, in any way, the concern that if content changes, there's a semi-stable thing here? So this would be like healthcare provide, because without, like, a value set's a value set, right? The things that we care about is like code systems and the actual definition, but like a lot of times people will like reprofile other people's value sets. Is that good here?
I mean, the fact that the canonical URL for our value set won't change, although we know that whole process is ongoing and is separate and is going to mess everything up. But if the canonical URL for our value set will not change, if Infoway changes their canonicals. So that's a good thing. On the other hand, if they change their canonicals, well, they change the canonicals for their value sets, you're just going to need to re-expand them. If they change canonicals for any of their defined code systems, it's going to mean content created using the old code system canonical is going to have to be mapped. And, you know, because if you've got an instance that says, you know, concept 1, 2, 3 from code system HTTP old URL, and now they've got concept 1, 2, 3 at HTTP new URL, that's going to break all sorts of content.
So code system from Y changes. So then X has to change as well.
Well, so it's code system changes are going to impact instances.
But in terms of like the value set definition, a code like value sets get updated all the time with like, oh, and also we want to include this value from this additional code system without the underlying value set canonical changing, right?
Right. Yeah.
So like if a code, like let's just say that using our example, that another another value from a code system was introduced into this value set, I don't think it creates need for change in the canonical URL for our X and Y, right?
Particularly not for intentional value sets, which most of these are.
Yeah.
Because the intentional value set basically defines a logical formula to include it. And if there's new concepts in the underlying code system that now become included based on that formula, it just happens.
And as long as you generate an expansion based on the new content rather
That's
than
right.
the old content, you're fine.
That's right. I just went and looked to see what the BC guide is doing for practitioner role code. And we've defined a value set that's the union of all codes in the Infoway value set and all codes in terminology. Oh, and a bunch of local codes for practitioner role code. So we've defined, and I think we've done that a lot of places, taken the Infoway value set and included everything, and then added a few other codes that were appropriate locally. So we've
That makes
got
sense.
yeah, so we've got value sets that are defined on those. And right now we're using, like for the Infoway one, we're using that Infoway inforoute / code system / SCP type kind of reference. Which is probably why we never came up to the stub value set question, because all of our local code systems terminology bindings are failing until we get the terminology server in production.
I want to come back to this piece, which is if we're saying for some examples that we're going to try to do this.
That's really small. Can you make that bigger?
Oh, the actual, like the fact that our canonical is changing here. So I'm going to
yes.
post something and I want you guys to tell me like if it wouldn't work and why it wouldn't work. So if we were to create a stub for, and the value set in this X that we would host here was this, then even if 3 months from now, our canonical changes, well, this is a helpful structure. If we know that our canonical is going to change soon, then it might make sense in the really immediate short term to host this as the value set stub. And then once we have the new canonical and are gaining benefit from having some of this, like a little bit of a pass through, then look at putting the new CA baseline value set URL in. Otherwise, I'm just thinking this through, like if we made this today and we package this up, and let's say it's in 1.1.8. BC loads it, Alberta loads it, you've got that package and it works in that content. You know, if you don't update your package, but the next time that we put out 1.2 and we do have a new canonical, then I'm thinking that like this isn't valuable anymore. Right? Basically, like the interim structure is good, right? To have, or sorry, the intermediate structure, something in the middle works. But right now, if we start putting our canonical URL on top of that, we know that's also going to change.
Yeah, we don't want to create additional points of breakage.
And so like as a solution in like the next month, does it make sense to have these as like stub value sets created under this so that there's something and that it's something that like is less likely to change. And then in the future, let's say 3 months from now, where we have a new canonical URL for all of our artifacts, and any place we still need to have an intermediary stub value set, we move to this convention where we put a baseline, like kind of a reprofiled value set on top of it. Reasons why that wouldn't be the right approach. Can we think of any? Was what I said, did it make any sense at all?
Oh yeah, I think it makes sense. I just can't think of anything myself, but I'm not the right person. I don't have this sense of scope.
It's a good question. Do we have a URI mapping service from terminology side?
I think like we don't have it now, but even if we did, like, would we want to be making decisions that we know would force that to have to be in play?
Thanks.
Ideally not.
Oh wow, it's getting smaller and smaller. Okay. Um,
You have to split that into 2 slides here, Mike.
yeah, me thinks the same thing. So this is kind of similar to like what we have in PSEA, where if I pull up PSEA real quick, we'll look at it. When we've had to host sub value sets, we'll actually host it here. So you can just see like this is the URL of the value set, even though our project in PSEA has a URL that has PSEA in the name. We just say, okay, because this is for the purposes of publication and ease of distribution, we're going to give it its original value set and load it under that original value set. I'm keen to do that as an immediate fix while we work through when we want to apply the more baseline reprofiled value set into the mix. Is anyone opposed to that? is anyone opposed to us trying it out on the 17th and seeing like, you know, if we do the same approach here where we give it, this is the value set, and just kind of recreate it in our project, what that looks like. We don't have to package on the 17th, but I would like to at least pose it as this is our option moving forward as a short-term fix.
Sounds like a good activity for that meeting.
Okay. All right, so that's what I'm gonna pose it as. So basically for the provider role type and specialty. Using the original value set. In the stub definition, and basically like republishing them in the baseline project temporarily until we probably our next call for governance, I think we should get really serious about actioning against when we move to the new canonical URL, because these types of things I think are gonna just keep coming up until we make the transition. Okay, so I'm gonna say will
Yeah.
show these, or will in the next profiling call, that would be the 17th, and bring it back. Sound fair?
Sounds good.
All right, I'll fix up my,
So just to
Crazy.
confirm, the next governance call will be the first week of June?
Yes, I think that's what we're saying.
are folks, like, I'm thinking about your comment, Lorraine, like, is anyone keen to not package under this structure? Because we could get a package out on the next profiling, after the next profiling call when we make this, but if folks want to look at this before we make a 1.1.8, then it won't be available until the first week of June. In my mind, this is not a real change because it's literally just the same exact value set. It's just giving it like a landing page. So it's like more 1.18 material, but I don't know, folks have been weirdly quiet on this call, so I don't want to force a packaging if someone's not cool with it.
Actually, it's a great question for the 17th because we get more of the technical people on the profile call.
Okay, if folks on the profiling call are comfortable with calling it 1.1.8 with that type of fix, are we okay making it like when we make the change packaging under 1.1.8? And if they're not, then we'll bring it back to the governance folks and say, okay, we think it's more of like a substantial change. Are we cool with that?
I'm good with
Sounds
it
like a
moving
plan.
ahead. Sorry, Elliot, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that sounds like a plan. I think it can go out, but if people wanna see it in after we've made the change and make the call then, or people who are on the call on the 17th have other thoughts.
Okay.
And fine.
Yeah, just as long as we get a note to the forum when the package is ready and we
Yeah.
can pick it up.
All right, so then I think we'll take that as the next takeaway topic, and then just make sure we'll surface the like, is it actually a hot fix, bug fix versus a minor release? Beautiful. All right, I will save this and stop sharing, and I will see some of you folks next Friday, and to the rest of you, I will see you in June. Have a great weekend, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take